step that. I didn't bring it yet. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the workshop meeting at here in Delray Beach on October the 15th. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Marker,
Present.
Deputy Vice Mayor Long,
Here.
Vice Mayor Cassell,
Here.
Commissioner Burns,
Here.
Mayor Carney.
Here. The principal item on the agenda today is a discussion of the in lieu parking fees. As we are working our way through the public comments and allowing for workshops, I had a discussion with the city manager earlier today, and we decided for today we were going to allow staff to make its presentation, and then we were going to allow the people of the public to come up and comment on staff's presentation, and then give staff an opportunity to respond briefly, and then we were going to go to our discussion up here. Does that work for everybody? Is that perfect? Robert's rules kind of thing? Okay, great. Then I turn it over to city manager.
Well, do you want to amend the agenda first?
Do you want to do what?
Amend the agenda because the order of the agenda is different than that.
Which agenda?
This is the workshop.
Yeah. It says oh, somebody changed it? Because the one I have is this one that has public comments
It's got
first.
public comments.
Well, all right, it has public comments first. So I would like to amend the agenda in accordance with the schedule that I just laid out for the various
So
input
moved.
for the various departments.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Amended agenda. You're on.
Thank you. And Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, for future workshop meeting dialogue, I would like to follow the protocol we've had an opportunity to discuss earlier, Mr. Mayor, that you just shared here. Staff presentation on the subject followed by the opportunity for public comment and engagement, because I think that would be very productive in that regard. In other words, the protocol you've just outlined here at the dais, Mr. Mayor, I think would work productively for all. So that will be the practice going forward. So, Madam City Clerk, as we compile future agendas to this effect for workshop purposes, that will be the order.
Well, if that works for everyone, that's great. But for this meeting, it certainly is.
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, we can discuss how we want that to work. But I'm in general accordance with what you said.
Kind of makes sense.
Hmm?
I said it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense.
Okay, will do. With that, ladies and gentlemen, this is a bit of a long-awaited discussion in lieu parking. We devoted ourselves to making an opportunity available for a comprehensive discussion so that policy considerations can be offered accordingly. And we do have a formal presentation being made available by Director of Development Services, Anthea Geniotis, who's on deck to offer commentary as noted. Ms.
Okay.
Geniotis, if you would, please.
Okay, so in lieu parking is, for anybody who doesn't know, is basically a payment into the city's parking fund instead of providing required parking on site. It has been an active program since the 1970s. The last time the fee structure was looked at was 2017. So at the very least, some adjustment to fees, I think, is necessary. It is only available within the downtown areas. You either have central business district zoning or some of OSHAD is also included within the boundaries. The current program is available for new commercial development. You're building a new building and you're allowed to have 30% of the parking considered under the findings, to be provided through in lieu.
You're saying 30% of the parking requirement can be
For
made up?
new construction, up to 30%, the commission has to make findings that adequate public parking options exist in the area. If you are converting a building, let's use like Dada, I'm not sure that they used in lieu, but just for an example, a house into a restaurant in OSHAD where it's allowed, a use conversion currently, you can use 100% in lieu to meet your parking requirement. This is an incentive for adaptive reuse of the buildings that we have. It's been on the books for a while. Commercial additions and expansions that result for new parking, again, that goes back to the 30%. Now, one of the loopholes that we've encountered is that I build a brand new building and I take 30% off the top through a one-time payment into the fund. And now I'm an existing building and I'm going to do a use conversion from the retail business that I built into a restaurant. So that sort of at least what you'll see in this ordinance, and this came out of, I think, some work we did with the DDA on the West Atlantic parking exception of establishing the existing date of the buildings, right? So The current program is not applicable to residential development. It doesn't matter if it's in a mixed-use building. You cannot use in lieu to meet the requirements for residential construction. You have to give those tenants or residents parking spaces in the development. And they're not available anywhere outside of downtown. So you're in that mapped area for where in lieu is provided. So in lieu has been a revitalization tool for downtown, right? The goal of this beautiful Park Once environment that we've made is not to lose buildings to parking lots, which is the kind of urban renewal we saw in the 60s and the 70s downtown. This is meant to provide a way for uses to change without requiring the buildings to all be redeveloped. However, it also controls the mix of uses on the Ave, because in Florida, if you can build it, if you can park it, right? Restaurant has, on the Ave, 12 spaces per 1,000 is required for restaurant. And coming up with that in lieu payment is a lot of what maintains the stores and the retail businesses we see. If you're on a small property, which is defined in our LDR as a property less than 65 feet wide, you do not have to provide parking for any of the uses, whether it's a gym, whether it's a store, whether it's an office. When you get a little bigger, then the expectation is you can provide some parking, but the last thing we want to do is say, like, a store like Periwinkle is not, available. It can't be maintained, right? That's part of what makes the Village by the Sea.
I know that's your favorite.
So in the last 20 years, 46 properties have used in lieu for up to 292 spaces. However, the last 5 requests represent 29% of the last 20 years. So
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
So
the last 5
I know I'm
requests?
being wonky with math.
No,
but-
no, you're not. I just didn't hear
So
that
what you
last
can
part.
see is when it started, it would be 3 spaces, 1 space, 4 spaces. The last 5 requests that were processed, which is why the previous commission enacted and zoning in progress, were expansions and use conversions. And instead of asking for 3 or 4 spaces, it was 25 spaces, 33 spaces, 12 spaces, and one of the projects actually was to replace a building that was identified as a contributor in the Atlantic Avenue Historic Resource Survey. And so there was direction at that point to reevaluate. Maybe our fees were not high enough, right? Because if it's so easy to buy 33 spaces, perhaps we needed to look at the fees. And then also to look at the findings, because the previous commission, I think, was in the position that the findings that were required at the time only that there be public parking available, with actually no metrics as to what available meant, which is what you'll see is changed in this ordinance, that they couldn't really say no. They felt like they had met the findings. And so there is a revamping of the findings as well. However, that was at a direction at a different board. So it's really important we have this workshop so that we make sure this is still the direction that we're trying to go. Or if we need to add some or maybe refocus a little, so this is the opportunity to do that. So again, these are the different properties that have used in lieu, and that current finding of there's only one, that there is adequate public parking available, and that the request is consistent with the LDRs. So May 2nd was when the initial zoning in progress was adopted. It's been extended, especially to reflect that we have, some new leadership, and we need to make sure that we take their direction into account as well. And so ultimately the direction was to figure out how much public parking truly is available. Can we count it? Looking at the fees, revisit the findings, and then there's an employee parking program that we talked about. So the great thing about some of the technological upgrades that Public Works has been busy doing is that we have license plate recognition in the garages at this point, which is giving us real data in terms of when are they using the spaces, how often are the spaces. I will send this to you in a way you can read it. So sorry, you're peering at it. But and so what is the occupancy? what are the days and the times, because the demands are different during daytime hours versus Thursday and Friday. Thursday's actually a pretty hot night too, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night, and how much do they turn around? So we're able to, so if you look at occupancy for days of the week, you can see that, Friday night's where it's at, so things like that. This tells us, okay, how full are we? Do we need to adjust our rates, encourage some more people to use an Uber or carpool or whatever? Or is it time to really start considering that a certain area needs a parking garage, which is not a small undertaking financially? And again, it charts the times during the days of the week as well. This is all data that I don't even think we had access to 3 years ago, although I can't see Missy from here. So she has the details of how this is. This is through our parking system there. Also, when people ask, what have you been using the in lieu fees for? This is part of what we've been using the in lieu fees for. And she can give you a more detailed breakdown of some of that. So this is all really good data to have. The other new data that is forthcoming is we are going to be installing the sensors in the on-street parking spaces, because at the end of the day, not every space is created equally, right? Some are more valuable than others. And so they're not all going to cost the same, but we'll be able to tell by their occupancy, how much they're turning over or they're not, do we need to drop the fee here because, it's barely used and we want to make it easier, things like that. So those are things that have been done to help provide some data that we can get into. So what are we doing in the proposed amendment? We're still maintaining the use for conversions to existing buildings, but we are establishing the date of an existing building so that we're clear whether it was just built with not enough parking, now it's flipping to something else. It's something that you can then, evaluate when they come before you. There is the other direction we had with a lot of the discussion around preservation, whether it's a hindrance or important, was to build in as much incentives as we could to make it easier to own historic property than property that isn't historic. So there is a discount towards, or there's slight adjustments that make it more favorable to the historic properties, a little looser, maybe you can use a higher percentage, the fee is discounted a little bit. And then also for the other properties coming in that want to tap it for new construction, kind of limiting it to 2 stories in height, but letting an expansion to historic be 3, things like that, where there's just a little bit more of a foot on the scale to make it easier to own historic. Mm-hmm. The other foot on the scale is West Atlantic, because the West Atlantic neighborhood remains a target that we want to see redevelopment occur. So those in lieu in those areas is also discounted because we want to realize the SAT master plan, move that forward. It is still not proposed to be applicable to residential development. It is still not, the areas are not recommended to expand. And in fact, the initial proposal we have before you that, we need some direction on, if you don't agree, is that we were taking it off of the beach. So once you went east of the intercoastal, you needed to either park it or stay small. Mm-hmm. Those are our properties that are in the path of whatever the next hurricane name will be, and the idea not to sort of make it easier to overgrow your site. So maybe it's only, if you want to include it, perhaps it's only for use conversions or things like that. There are new findings that are proposed. Instead of just saying there's adequate public parking, the area is defined. So is there adequate public parking within 750 feet of the subject site?
Is that 750 a bigger number than it used to be?
So it used to be 350. It was changed to be, no, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of off-site parking arrangements. So off-site parking outside of downtown, it has to be within 350 feet. Downtown, we go to 750, which is about a 2.5-minute walk. A 5-minute walk is like 1,325. And Historic Preservation Board had suggested that we broaden the radius to be a 5-minute walk for downtown. And so that's something that we could consider at your direction to expand. But the idea is, well, what are we going to define available as? Like, how do we know what's available? And so with the garage, at this point now, we can measure what does availability mean, and when these responses come to you, we can say, we have not exceeded an 80% utilization rate on any night, there's still room. Because, I mean, it's only so many spaces, but they turn over, right? So how available are they?
Can I ask a quick question? So I know we use that license plate reader technology in the garage. What happens if an individual backs into their spot? Because we do not have license plates on the front of the cars in Florida.
I think they clock it as you enter the garage,
Oh, okay.
but I don't know. So,
So it's when they come in? Okay, thank you.
and then there's
Yeah.
also, I
Conspiratorial.
suspect I'll need you again, but there's, but we are in the process of installing sensors on the on-street spaces, and that's going to be able to give utilization data. It's not going to be available immediately. I think it's a good year out, maybe less. You need to just walk up here. Just come sit. So, I told her, I was like, you better stay close. I don't know all the things. So.
What am I answering?
Sensors. When is the sensor data?
Okay, we've just completed installing all of the sensors, and we're working on fixing bugs in the system that are coming out. So within the next couple of months, we'll be able to provide that real-time data. To answer your question about parking garages, in the Old School Square garage, we actually have level-by-level parking that provides a sensor in each parking space. So as you pull in, the sign at the entrance tells you how many spaces are available per level. In Federspiel and the public spaces that are in the 4th and 5th Delray, otherwise known as the iPic garage, we have license plate readers, and they read the license plate as it comes in and then as it leaves.
So we will actually be able to tie evaluating these requests in specific areas to exactly what is around. And if something is exceeding 80% utilization rate, then maybe it's not a good idea to waive the parking away from a specific redevelopment application. The other thing you'll notice is that historic properties are exempt from this. The last thing, again, we want is for the landscape of our historic neighborhoods or structures to change because somebody's got to tear something down to put some asphalt in for parking, right? So, again, that makes it a little bit easier to maintain and maintain the value of historic properties over time. And then finally, that you should be able to say no if this is a tool for us to use to encourage the type of downtown development that we want. And if the property that is being, if somebody came forward and wanted to use INLU to replace the Colony, I think we would all agree, like, no, we're not going to help you do that, right, with our alternative parking program. So this, because there was not, and I know the two of you were on the commission, where you really didn't have a finding where you could say, well, no, because this, we would rather keep this building than the one you're proposing. So this gives you that ability as well. So it's more of a measurable standard for availability, and then providing that incentive that we were directed to under the previous commission for historic structures.
Do you think 35 years is the right number?
Yes, that's sort of an industry standard. But if you want to debate that, I'm going to
just
have to
asking
ask Ms.
questions.
Alvarez
I'm
to come up
just-
too.
Got a bunch of notes, just
Yes.
asking questions.
Yes. And then you would have to also meet one of the following, right? Are you asking for this to preserve a historic structure? Are you doing a project that provides investment in the West Atlantic Subdistrict? So that's the area that is west of Swinton. And are you using this to provide adaptive reuse of an existing building? So it's really not geared towards new development in the heart of downtown anymore. It'd be geared towards trying to provide that tool to the area that still needs redevelopment, which is West Atlantic, right? But if I'm missing, again, this is a checkpoint because, maybe there's something we're not reading right. Okay, so there's been a lot of discussion about what are INLU fees used for. In the code currently, and it carries forward into this ordinance, they are used for parking infrastructure or bike ped improvements. Part of why we can be flexible with parking downtown is because we've created an environment where it's fairly comfortable to walk. So it's called a park once environment. And, you know, that's part of where, well, I would park my car over there, but I need a sidewalk connection, or the lights aren't that great, or, you know, whatever. It gives that ability to use some of those funds to improve that. It was used for the LPR infrastructure in the garages we were talking about. It's also been used for the installing the sensors. It's also been used historically for assessing parking counts, when we actually had to hire people to sit there and click and count. And then for the software of the system, also for the parking curbside management plan. And at this point, the balance is over $800,000, which is not enough to build a garage. And my understanding is there's probably going to be some left over from the sensor project that'll go back in. But, you know, I'd say a round number, there's probably $1 million available total right now. So this goes to kind of what the fees are now, how they work. So right now there are, I'm going to go actually one more because I missed this. All right, so the current structure of the in-lieu fees is that there are 5 areas. Under the current thing, there's 5 areas. So area 1 is most of downtown, right? It doesn't include this part by the railroad, this green, and the beach. These are the most expensive spaces in green. They are $23,000 a space. When you get into area 2 contains OSHAD and this area that is like Pineapple Grove Way. Those spaces are currently $10,140 a space. Area 3 is West Atlantic, and those are $4,600 a space. I don't believe we've had anyone use it there. And then area 4, which is the railroad corridor up here, and then the part down here in the south, which has probably also got railroad subdistrict, those are at $4,600 each. So the proposal is that there's not a lot of difference in the investment and the value of the properties between most of the green and most of the yellow. So the idea is to collapse it into 3. So 3 would have OSHAD proper sort of be the area 2. The green area is the bulk of the downtown. West Atlantic stays here because of the indication of what's historic and what's not. That's also mapped. Marina, for example, is here, and then it's been removed from the beach, and so that's something else we need to talk about and consider, whether you want to maintain that or just limit its application, or if you think we've got that right. The other thing that is done is that given some of the impacts from the adaptive reuse of buildings, you'll notice if you look closely on my tiny map, we have actually taken the areas that abut single family out of the in-lieu program. Because if we get it wrong and we in-lieu away the spaces and it's not enough parking, it's going to trickle in the neighborhoods.
Right.
So if you are on the east side of 6, unless you're on a historic property, there's the Plum Building, it's not in the program currently. And the same thing over down here in the railroad corridor. The minute you are butting up into Osceola Park, maybe you should make sure you have enough parking so you're not inadvertently impacting the single family neighborhoods. There had been discussion at the time for, I think there was some discussion like, should it just be an annual fee? And that's a little bit too hard, in my opinion, for us to check over time. Like, we're going to send code enforcement out to close businesses because, it just gets a little heavy-handed at that point. But if you've torn down the project and anything more than 50%, you generally have to bring a property up to code, then that concept is we're starting over on your parking situation. So that also is fairly assertive. So again, now side by side, here's the comparison. So these properties down south here, as you'll notice, have been taken out. The side of the railroad where it's into this neighborhood is taken out. The beach is removed. Atlantic Crossing is removed because I don't think anybody here thinks we need to provide more incentive for the project. So that's really what to pay attention to here that has been taken out. Anything that butted up against Palm Trail, just kind of taking those out just in case we get it wrong. So everyone I know has been reacting strongly to the $50,000 per space. And I would just remind you that if you want to build the Gladiola lot 10 years from now, 5 years from now, a space right now is over $31,000 a space. I mean, this number is a year old, so Missy could probably tell you it might even be higher.
And that doesn't include the cost of the land. That's just the space, right?
That's
I think
just the
I
structure.
calculated out years ago at like 45,000 per
Yeah.
space when you talk land and construction and final project. That's
So
a big fee.
So to be fair, we do use it for other things, like I just outlined. But if we said, you developer are not going to have to buy more land or build a parking garage, and the residents of Delray Beach are going to do it for you, the question is, what's the base amount? And I'm glad the mayor has the history in banking, because future value of money.
You and I have had this conversation several
Future
times.
value of money, I
Regarding-
didn't know. So I'm hoping to get a little bit of input on that. And then we just assigned a series of discounts to the different areas based on what you were doing. So, for example, if you are in the West Atlantic neighborhood, Area 3, we haven't had much demand there yet. There's still a lot of availability on the on-street spaces, things like that. But if you're doing new development, it's not a historic property. You're coming in doing a big CBD project on the Ave. It would be $12,500 per space. If you're not building your own, keep in mind you can just provide your own parking. That is another option. But then again, if you are doing adaptive reuse or expansion of a historic structure, that it would get a more significant discount. But again, the current rate in West Atlantic is $4,600, and no one has used it. So that, we need to decide how we want to price that. But there are other incentives. I'll go over them as well. So downtown parking requirements, actually, they reflect the walkability of the area. They tend to be lower for office and other uses, retail. Like I said, even the smaller properties don't have to provide it at all. And I know there's an ongoing discussion about the parking ratios and do they include employees. The industry standard for assigning parking ratios to uses includes all aspects of the use. It includes the customers, it includes the employees. That is just how those planning numbers work. So to say we have to add on to it for employees, just raise the ratio. And look, every place is a little different. It's okay for us to adjust our ratios if we don't think they're meeting the demand that we have. But I think it's a little bit odd to say, well, we're not accounting for a big part of that user, but you should be able to buy all the parking out or more of the parking out, because then we're still not, I don't know. So it's a dicey, careful little requirement that has such impact on everyone. There's also this idea, again, that we don't want to tear down the city to provide parking so everybody can come to the city, and then there isn't anything nice to look at because we've removed it all because we had to put in parking. What is it? The Joni Mitchell song, right? Right now, on the books today, right, if your property is less than 65 feet wide and the historical plat of the city was 50 feet, you are not required to provide off-street parking unless you are bringing in a new restaurant or bar. So if you want to open a new shop, you want to open a new office, if you want to even add a residential above your office, you're not required to provide parking. There is a special provision in the West Atlantic neighborhood as well, which is that if you are changing the use in an existing commercial building, say on Fifth Avenue, which is the historic Main Street of that neighborhood, you can change a shop into a restaurant, and we will not assess you for parking, because that's kind of how downtown started, right? We let these uses come in, and then they started having impact, and then we adjust the parking, and then we adjust the in lieu, and then we pool our resources to make more parking and things like that. Right now, West Atlantic can absorb some new businesses without having to come up with more parking. They have on-street spaces. There's the lot that's across from the housing authority. There's some availability. So in an effort to try to provide a revitalization tool, that's the only place right now where those smaller buildings that are existing commercial buildings can be changed out without a parking assessment. It is a limited time. We just renew it 2 years at a time until we're sure whether it works. We are the last phase, the last time I looked, at the Coastal Link ever running on FEC. They have to sort the New River Bridge out for our link, so I think they're going to go north before they go south. But ultimately, passenger rail, commuter rail, not Brightline going to Orlando, but regular daily commuter rail will eventually go back, which is where it started, on the FEC line, which was Flagler's rail line. And the location for the city's planned Coastal Link station is behind Johnny Brown's in that public lot. It may end up evolving eventually, but right now, that is the only city-owned piece of property we have that could accommodate that. So planning, if you are close to that close to where we expect a station to eventually be built in the next 10 years or so, your parking requirement's a little bit less, because we sort of think you're going to have another pretty significant transportation option close to you. So those properties are there. Let's see, if you in any CBD or OSHAD property, if you're making a change and it just results in a one space requirement, it's waived once. We track it through the property, so you can't waive it and then 5 years waive it again, and then 2 years waive it again, but there is an easy way to do that. You don't have to pay in lieu, you don't have to come up with it. There's other ways to provide parking through off-site parking agreements and valet parking approvals that come to the commission for consideration. So those are options too. And these ordinances were crafted using the guidance of the comprehensive plan, which are telling us make adaptive reuse easy, pursue incentives for historic properties. So that's part of what we put into crafting, and also the experience of the last few years where really significant amounts were coming through. This has made some rounds. It may need to make some rounds again, depending on the direction. I know DDA had a little bit of a discussion about it today. I only got to listen to some of it. But ultimately, it's been well received through the lower boards. And I think this is kind of where I am now. If we want to move to, that completes me, what I have to offer. And I think it'd be at this point easier to answer questions. So,
Thank you very much. Members of the public, if you would like to address this matter, please come to the podium or lectern and give your name and address. You'll each have 3 minutes. There is a maximum of 30 minutes we allow for public comment during a workshop. So if those who want to be too prolific,
Did I hear you correctly? 30 minutes? You meant
total of 30 minutes. Not for you. You get 3.
I was like,
No,
wow,
there's a
I could
maximum.
just carry on.
When everybody
for
speaks, there's a
long
maximum.
time.
Not you, Jim, because you could do 30 in like
Mayor, Vice Mayor, Deputy Vice Mayor, Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about this very important topic here. I have been around and been involved in most all the studies that have taken place over the years here with Anthea, I think going back to when she was at Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council and so forth. I'm a lot rounder and probably shorter since those times, but anyway. My comments are, I've spoken to a number of people and have been approached by a number of people. The DDA did take a position on it today. They voted unanimously to go ahead and leave the in lieu the way it is. The reason why they took that position is they don't believe that the changes are going to help out the small property owners. I don't see a lot of the small property owners tearing down their buildings and putting up large buildings. And if you are 65 feet wide or less, it's correct. You don't have to do the parking unless you turn into a restaurant. But anyhow, the reality is that to do parking, let's just say you're converting a use or something and you're a small property, you can't go underground because of the depth that you have to go under and so forth to get down there. The distance, let me say, not the depth necessarily, but the distance to get down and get back up with a parking garage. I've gone through and spent a lot of time. Now, I'm not here after 11 o'clock at night in the downtown. That's probably when it's much busier and everything else, so forth. But I've gone through and driven through the parking garages, looked at all the private parking lots that are out there, and it does not appear to me that we have a parking shortage. We have a parking shortage right in front of the business, the restaurant, whatever else. But if we encourage people to utilize the old School Square garage, the Federspiel garage, the new Sunday Village garage that's being built, so forth, that will do a number of things. One, it will get them off of the main streets and get them doing what Gibbs' study said, walking, hitting other shops. If I'm walking by 7 or 8 shops, it's more likely that I'm going to buy things at those shops as opposed to parking in front of the one, walking in, getting something, and walking out. And Thea did a great job in the study and everything else, so forth, but I still think there's a lot out there. It mentions that it's been used 42 or 46 times over since the 1970s. There's $800,000 or thereabouts. Hopefully that $800,000 grew. It was in an interest-bearing account, and it's actually more than that, and there's some more funds to that. And the DDA's motion and discussion today, they said, well, why don't we take some of the $800,000, or actually all of the $800,000, and hopefully, again, there's interest and so forth on that, and start pushing forward the Gladiola lot where we have today the land and ready to go forward. Can I come back up not as a DDA member, because I didn't get to finish my comments
I'm sorry,
here.
but just finish your comments.
Okay,
We'll-
so real quick,
a little leeway.
the CRA controls most of West Atlantic. That's why there hasn't been any utilize of the parking out there. Once they actually get to a developer that's going to build it, I'm sure you're going to see somebody, but you don't want to hit them with higher increases and so forth on West Atlantic. You want them to get what we've talked about for 30 plus years of the West Atlantic getting built. And then it sounds like there haven't been any parking spaces actually built with the funds, which was part of it that's out there to do. Hopefully, we can figure out a way to actually use the money for the parking. And there was an article yesterday in the paper. I apologize, I don't have multiple copies of it, but if I can hand this to the clerk, it's talking about downtown Lake Worth and how they're giving away 1.7 acres of land to have a cultural facility built along with parking and some apartments and so forth in the downtown. Other cities are not as blessed as we are. Having a parking problem, which I don't perceive to be a parking problem, but having all the activity we have is a wonderful thing for our community here. And I hope that we'd be able to leave it the way it is right now. We have additional studies are being done. We got a lot of funds coming in from the metered parking and so forth. And hopefully we can see what that actually is doing and really analyze how much our parking is being utilized. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, sir.
May I ask him a question? Or,
You may.
okay, you kept referring to small property.
Uh-huh.
Considering property under 65 feet in width is exempted, what is your definition of small?
So my comment to that, well, 2 comments too. 100 feet, 75 feet is not significant. I'm not talking about tripling the size or anything else. And when you look at the 65 feet, that still does apply to the restaurant, correct? You have to provide the parking for the restaurant at 12 per thousand?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both.
Thanks. Hi, Stephanie Emmelman, Derry Beach Chamber of Commerce. So our advocacy committee, our executive committee, and our board did look at this quite extensively. And overall, we feel that the city staff has done a great job to incentivize what we want in the town, such as development in West Atlantic, development of historic property. The fees are roughly in line with the 50% discount of what they are now. Where it jumps up really high is the adaptive reuse of the non-historic buildings. And it is a lot. But in talking with a lot of people, it is in line with what the actual costs are to build this parking space if you include the land. So we think that that's fair. That being said, what we're really worried about is the effect of the small businesses and the small properties and the retailers specifically. Since we sent our letter, Anthea wrote back and reminded us that the code doesn't require parking if it's less than 65 feet wide. And that's a good start, but maybe increasing the exempted footage a bit might be something that you'd want to consider. We also think that the radius available for public parking, it's 750 now. Increasing it to 1,000 feet would be a good idea. It's less than a 5-minute walk, and it seems to make sense. And that's all we have. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon. For the record, Christina Belenky of Miskel Backman. My address is 14 Southeast 4th Street in Boca Raton. Pleasure to be here before you this afternoon. We represent various property owners that have large properties, small properties, all kinds of properties within the downtown areas. And just to kind of bring this back to the purpose of the in lieu, it really is intended to incentivize revitalization of existing properties, allow for the adaptive reuse. And in changing the fees to the current proposal, some of the fees are going upwards of 5 times what they were previously. If you're looking at those properties near the railroad, some of those are 12 times the fees of what they previously were. And at some point, it starts to discourage revitalization and discourage the adaptive reuse. And instead, it almost incentivizes demolishing those existing structures because you could build more square footage. Yes, you're paying the same amount for parking either way, so why not get more square footage, more intensity by demolishing the structures on the property? And that's, I think, counterintuitive to what the in lieu incentive is supposed to be. So I just wanted to make note of that. Previously there were the 5 different areas, and they've been collapsed into 3. And many of those areas that were previously separated were done so because there are properties within those sub areas that need that revitalization, need that spark. Maybe they're dark. So by collapsing them and again, increasing the fees so exorbitantly, it's really detrimental to those properties that are seeking revitalization and to bring life in the dark spots of the downtown areas. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, Commissioners, Tyler Knight. So in the housing element of the comp plan, it states that Delray is 98% developed. That means we only have 2% of land left. And if you drive around, you can tell it's mostly small parcels. We have the strictest parking codes in Palm Beach County. I've yet to see someone who has more aggressive parking codes than we do. And I just feel like that's putting another burden on the small property owners in this town. And then back to one of the questions you asked my dad, Anthea, is with the amount of columns and the widths required in the code here, with like the drive aisles going underground at like 100 or 130 feet, makes it very difficult. We've looked at with the architects. We can squeeze it in at some number in the hundreds, but anything less than 100, you really can't go underground with the drive aisle requirements, things like that. So that's why. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other? Yes?
George Long, 46 North Seward Avenue. I have both a dog in the fight and a horse in the race. And that's
I'm betting
true.
on them both just because
First
you're
of
a
all,
lucky
I'm going
guy.
to make this clear. I'm for this, okay? But I don't want to miss an opportunity. It's good. It's a good program. You guys got it well planned out. You've taken a lot into consideration, and it's really great for historic properties, which I have. But I would like to complain, take advantage of this. Can you put somewhere in there a mechanism, a clause, where that some of these other parking reliefs can be applied for as a variance or something like that, so we don't have to go Bert Harris and inverse condemnation, stuff like that? We have a parking problem. And why would I bring that up? Well, years ago when I get to do this again. I've complained about this so much. When the Block 60 was redeveloped, the sidewalk was put behind my house. Okay, the access was what they call taken. There's actually, I left the double fence back there in case anybody questions me, and you could say, well, was it improved? Well, Stanley Tate already addressed that with the city years ago when you guys interfered with one of his unimproved roads out in it was Davis Road. But anyway, I guess the upshot of this, I have to have parking off the property, period. And the way this affects me, and I'm not complaining, I was still all for it. I could have probably bought spaces for $10,000. Now it's only 2.5 times more, be $25,000 if I use the city type thing. Maybe I work. Don't worry about me. I'll work something out the CRA or something because they have a parking lot over there. But there's well, I guess I'm through complaining, but this essentially is a good thing. Even though it's on the surface, for me, it looks like it might be not too good. There's the small parking, certainly that's involved there. But anyway, go with it. But if you could somehow have a mechanism in there where a person could apply for other parking relief because their parking has been a hardship has been created by the city involving their parking, it would be nice. Of course, this is a unique situation, probably won't happen to anybody else, but think about that. Thank you.
Thank you
and
very
you'll
much.
hear more for me. I'll make a formal request someday.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
Just getting you primed. Okay?
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, or good afternoon, actually. Laura Simon with the DDA. Just to follow up on our treasurer, Jim Knight. The DDA did meet today to discuss the in lieu changes that are being proposed, and the consensus, I think, majority of the board feels that it is steep to go to the 50,000, in agreement with some of the other comments too, that maybe there's a gradual increase. There is definitely a concern of the de-incentivizing. While it does look like it is a to rehab and for reuse, which is the intent originally in the 1970s, and again stated again in the 88, as I found some documents in our history books, that is more to induce and encourage revitalization of our downtown buildings and historic buildings and older buildings and contributing. It is definitely something that is there other incentives that can also be applied to that as well, as we look to encourage that revitalization versus really focusing on the in lieu. And then again on the in lieu fees, again, where are those being, because originally the in lieu fees were definitely being put into spaces, acquiring spaces, acquiring land. And that is something that we would really encourage to look at, because our downtown is definitely swelling, and you see private properties now metering lots, which they didn't used to be. But also, it was just, I think for us, it's really important to continue to incentivize versus really just look at funding as a funding mechanism. And the other questions or comments that were made were specifically around the smaller that were exceeded the 65-foot. But we're not as large, so they fall in that middle range to find maybe there's other relief. Maybe it's the number of spaces versus the amount. But I think the biggest comments were investing in new parking and the fees to look at a reduction in the fee rate. So, thank you.
Okay.
Montre Bennett, 323 Northwest 2nd Avenue. As it pertains to West Atlantic, I don't think nothing need to be built for parking unless some businesses are built over there. So thank you. That's my comment.
Thank you. Montre.
Hi, everybody. Alan Costello, Big Al Steaks, not as DDA chair. The In Lieu program was originally started because we needed parking and we had none downtown. It was already built out. The money was supposed to be put aside and used to build parking spots. That was in the 70s, and it never happened. In the 90s, the DDA donated for $10 the railroad parking lot with a few hundred spots, and it donated for $10 the village lot. I don't really know how many spots are there, but we never built. I know this number of $31,000 per spot for the Gladiola lot came up, but we never built the Gladiola lot. We collected a lot of money. We've used it now for other things, but we never used the in lieu parking money for in lieu parking, for parking. I think there should be a goal set to build that Gladiola lot, however we have to do it, get started, use the money that we have been using for other stuff like sensors and whatever, and use it for the parking. I think that's what it was intended for. I think it's a good idea. If we have a historic building problem and we need to preserve them, I think incentives and relief are all terrific. But these huge amounts for parking spots are really punitive to small guys. I would never have been able to build my restaurant if I had to pay $23,000 or $50,000 for a spot. And I think we're missing the whole point, which is to create and build parking spots. However we need incentive for overall historic preservation or for West Atlantic, we still need parking. Cars are coming. We're not going to go to bicycles. We're not going to Uber ourselves all the time. It is necessary to have parking downtown. We've collected some money. I think we should use it to find a way to build. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Seeing no more public comment, do you have any further comment?
So I do. I think what would be helpful as we work through this is there are two distinct documents in front of you. One is the ordinance that includes things like, you can't build it, and then you get 30% off, now you get 50% off, now you get, how are we tracking, and the findings we're using to decide whether a property should have in lieu or not, and having a technical method of knowing what means parking is available, because right now it's all being done through perception. And this is the biggest issue with parking, right? Is that there's a perception there's a parking problem, or is there really a parking problem? And this has been the issue that we have worked around with downtown all the time. The resolution that establishes the base fee, that is a different discussion, right? How much is too much? So the ordinance sets the rules around, what are we going to use in lieu for? Now, I actually don't agree with some of what Ms. Belinkie said, because I don't think that the Pineapple Grove area, with the investment of the Ray Hotel and Cannery Row and the Arts Garage and everything we see coming up on 3rd Avenue, is as blighted as when these different areas were defined. That is why they have been collapsed into one area, because I think you would be hard-pressed to say that you can tell when you leave. It used to be like the Ave, we had one great street. Now we have these other streets that are just as viable, and so it's reflecting that in terms of those areas. So how much blight do you really need to cure on Pineapple Grove Way? It's changed. So there's that. So I would just implore you that there's different tools that are referenced. So the idea that we give an exemption for every use except restaurant and bar for small properties, that maybe small properties need to be 100 feet or less. So 2 platted 50-foot lots instead of 65. That's an option. Is it something we do by tenant space? But keeping in mind, then that opens tenant spaces up in larger developments. Sunday Village has built a huge garage that's coming in with them. Atlantic Crossing, as much as a lightning bolt as that project can be, they brought in a tremendous amount of parking with that. And then the other thing is, so again, the price is one thing, and we can talk about the price, but the ordinance is also something else.
Right.
So if 50,000 is too much of a base, but I would think it would be hard-pressed to leave it the way it is.
Right.
Because those fees have not been revisited since 2017, and I don't think $1 in 2017 equals $1 in 2024. So at the very least, that needs to adjust. And then the findings were not adequate. That the previous commission wrestled with the findings. They were not finding the tools they needed to really evaluate the options.
Could I ask a question? How did you get to that 65-foot number?
So that came in I think 2015. It's actually been on the books for a while. And that was because it was originally if you were under 50 feet. And I remember really well, this is back when I was with Treasure Coast actually. I believe Mr. Pike, who's a local engineer, we were talking about just the size of building like a double-loaded parking lot. And if it was anything smaller than 65 feet, you actually could not fit a traditional sort of
Got it.
double loaded. So this gave you 60 feet and then a 5-foot landscape buffer, and you could actually provide parking once you had at least that amount.
Understood.
So if it was less than that, we decided that
You
we
can't have
want to
parking.
maintain the smaller properties as being viable without being agglomerated into big developments like Atlantic Crossing.
Right.
So.
And I think we all want that.
Right.
So that number seems like it makes good sense in light of that explanation. Thank you.
I have some comments on 65 feet, just to, as to whether or not that is a hard and fast number, because I don't know the answer. I do take into account whether or not you can provide your own parking if you're at 65 feet. If you're unable to provide your own parking, be it underground, is what I guess was suggested, you can't do it at 65 feet because, right? I mean,
Well, there's also ramps and inclines and other things that have to be taken into comment. I don't think anything smaller than the Ray has ever come in with a subterranean parking since I've been here. I mean, there's dewatering and other things.
I'm not saying it's not the right number. It's a number we've thrown out there.
Well, she said somebody
It's a number for
gave-
a
did
double loaded surface
there was a
parking lot
reason.
with a 5-foot landscape buffer. That's
Right.
basically what it is.
Are you thinking it should be more or less?
I'm assuming there's different parking schematics that are out there now. So I'm not going to accept what was as the going forward number is all I'm saying. But anyway, to the commission, Mr. Long, would you like to start off?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. So I was actually part of the commission that moved this forward and started this process. And I want to just say you guys have done a wonderful job. Thank you. But I do have concerns, and none of those are an indictment on you or your team, Anthea. You guys did a really, really great job. But my position on this has evolved a bit. I do have some concerns about this having a disproportionate impact on our small businesses downtown. And we have, frankly, a lot of things we're wrestling with in this city right now, and I'm kind of a proponent at this point of the if it ain't broke, don't fix it model. And I'm not convinced that our current program is broken. I certainly understand the need to update things from 2020 or 2017. I get that, but going over how much this has actually been used over the years, and you referenced the loopholes, I get that, but I don't really feel like this program has been abused necessarily. In fact, the last 5 requests that you referenced, to me, all seem to be within a relatively short distance of parking garages downtown, which even by these numbers are still underutilized. And I want Delray to be a more walkable city. I think it is better for commerce. I think that's what we should be moving towards. And that's what all of our studies say. And so I want to encourage people to use our existing parking garages. And now I do want to see another parking garage in Delray, whether it's at Gladiola or it's something that maybe we find a public-private partnership to build one if we can't fund it through the city. But I'm not willing to necessarily impact our small business owners disproportionately to fund a parking garage if that's kind of what this is about. So listen, I'm open to maybe discussing changes to this, but I will say in its current form, I got to listen when the DDA comes up here and they agree unanimously. I don't really hear the DDA agree unanimously on much, and they agree on this unanimously. I have to take that into account. And Ms. Immelman raised the concern as well. And so at this point, I don't feel comfortable moving forward with this as it's written, but I'm certainly anxious to hear what my colleagues think.
Commissioner Casal.
Thanks. Well, if I may, Mr. Long, no offense, but those projects that all recently utilized, none of them except Subculture have been developed. Docks has not been developed. It got 25 spaces. We don't know the ramifications. Subculture, we're getting complaints from Daniel Rose on a weekly basis about parking issues. The 3rd Avenue Sushi Restaurant, we haven't seen that, and so we don't know what the experience is going to be. Bricktops, we don't know what the experience is going to be. And American Social, we have no idea what the experience is going to be. But I sat up there when this first went back to you for some consideration because we were getting, people did not want to approve it, but they felt like they had to for lack of a reason not to. I didn't approve Docks because I just thought it was excessive. It was 50% or more of the parking that they needed to operate, they did not have. And the idea of why we have parking requirements is to keep our structures smaller. So if you don't have enough parking, you can't build bigger. So you're basically building smaller. Now, it's interesting, Mr. Long had that question, and I had that on my list. We don't want to impact our small businesses. We all agree, but we also don't want the taxpayers to bear the burden of having to build the parking garages. So is there a way, if you are a much smaller property, and maybe we look at the number, to have a hardship application that we could consider, or you could consider? But I do think we need to move forward. We are well past the time. We've increased our rates across the board in the city because we need to keep operating. And in this instance, I love that you took the beach out, the area, that small area west of the beach, because I think we all agree we want to keep it small. We were bouncing back between what is current and what is contemplated. That idea of maintaining the 2 stories, is that in the new or the old, or are you trying to figure out what we want?
So right now, I mean, to your point about docks, the docks addition, if they were limited to a 2-story addition, that would have been, if they didn't get to send 25 spaces off the site, it would have been a 2-story building and not a 3-story building. So there's that.
Right.
Like, what is it? Because, I mean, it's really perplexing as to why the implication is that this hurts a small business. They're exempted unless we're trying to build more restaurant and bars on the Ave.
Right.
And that's
not what
maybe
everybody wants.
Maybe what we want. I mean, I don't know.
I don't think the residents want that.
So that the small business concern, it continues to, I don't totally understand it. If we want to expand it to 2 lots, 100 feet, that you're exempted, fine. If you exempt restaurant and bar, the whole Ave's going to go restaurant and bar.
Right, and I don't think we should do that.
I keep being told we don't want to be Clematis Street, so
No.
I don't, or Bourbon, or whatever.
And you had somebody do a study, and they said 65 feet. So I'm comfortable going with that. But the question I guess I had was, so the 2-story limit is going to stay in this newly, or you're asking for my recommendation? I
think
would say.
At this point, I think there are a couple key questions, and I probably should just make a slide where we can ask, is the beach in or out, or is it only in for use conversions? I think that's the first question. The second question is, do you agree with taking the properties that border single-family neighborhoods out
Yes,
of Inlow?
and yes.
I mean, I don't know. I think that's the other one. Then, using more measurable metrics to assess the requests is a question. Then if you don't want to limit the application of Inlow, that anybody could ask for it instead of like just people who are doing adaptive reuse and historic, like we can make that adjustment, that anyone can ask for it provided the project isn't going to go higher than 2 or 3 stories, whatever it is you want. There's ways we can customize
Right.
it to see, like if you want to scale back the application of it, but still make it available everywhere. And then ultimately, what is the base price that you want to use for this? And we, instead of assigning discounts, we can just say, I mean, the reason we structured it out was that you understand that when Public Works is asked to build the Gladiola lot, what they're going to spend on a space.
Right. Yeah.
So, any feedback, any direction that you give, we can customize the ordinance to reflect. But in my opinion, there have been problems with the existing one. In my opinion, the price, it's easier for you to just buy 33 spaces rather than really build a development, then you're asking, the price you're paying doesn't even pay for the space we have to build, even at the 23,000 number right now. So I don't know. We could say anybody can ask for it, but no, instead of a percentage, there's no more than a 15 space maximum. We can do whatever you think would maintain the tool in a reasonable manner. I would advocate, just from a staff perspective, that we at least apply metrics to what we consider available parking, because that
Right.
just makes it, we're getting the tools where it's going to be a lot easier for us to tell you the utilization rates as we move forward. So at the very least, using a metric instead of a perception of parking, which whether it's to be relieved of parking or
Right.
it's to raise prices or whatever, it's better to have actual data to make a decision. So that's the only thing that I
Agree.
would suggest. We do have new development coming in that is approved on West Atlantic. It just didn't request in lieu, it parked itself.
Great.
Most of it has residential in the mix, so.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Burns.
Yes, I actually sat on the commission that we asked you guys to move forward, and thank you for all of this. I thought it was going to be very simple, but it's not. And I think you answered two of my questions during your commentary with the other commissioners, because I was going to ask, have we determined whether there is a parking issue or is there still a perception? But I like what you just said, to use a metrics versus perception, so that answered that. And, like the DDA, concerned about small businesses. We've seen so many of our local retailers leave downtown. And I don't know how many of the buildings are empty right now, but that's concerning. But I do think that, in terms of the price, that it is very steep. And I agree with what Laura said about a gradual increase as opposed to this whopping, very steep increase. And I also like what Mr. Long said about including some clause so that if there's a hardship, there could be imposed by the city that it could be looked at on an individual basis. I think other than, having this money collected over all these years and not putting in a lot, I think that we really do need to concentrate on building some sort of lot, some place, whether it's the Gladiola or whatever, but using those funds that we have toward a lot, a garage, or whatever we have.
So thank you for reminding me of Mr. Long's question about relief, because I didn't address it. I was trying to circle things I had to go back to.
By the way,
Lisa.
that's George Long, not Rob Long.
Yes, Commissioner Long, Mr. Long, the voice of reason. So
We're giving you credit. I mean, it's already in my newsletter.
The code currently has a provision for you to ask for a parking reduction. Now, do I think that a restaurant coming into downtown somewhere should ask for a reduction when all the other restaurants had to figure it out? No. But we do have instances where certain uses are unique, or they've already got 3 of them in other cities and they know exactly how much parking they need, and they can go to the board in charge of their approval and put forward a request for a reduction. So that mechanism exists just to be relieved of the requirement that is there. Otherwise, I suppose you should use in lieu if you're in downtown, but.
So you anticipate a mechanism?
There is one already for special conditions.
Right.
Okay.
Are you
That's
finished?
it. I think that's it, because she also said that small businesses are exempted, and that was what I was concerned about. Okay, all right, I'm done.
Commissioner Marker.
Thank you. Anthea, great work as always by you and your team. Missy, appreciate the input. You guys have done great work here. I'm sensitive after listening to the public comment today about the small business impact. And I think we have to think more about that a little bit, just to be clear. I don't think we're far away, but I would really like it if our community leaders were a little bit more on board with that. So I think that's an area that we should look a little bit harder at. I do think our in lieu fees seem really low, and that's been feedback that I heard when I was campaigning, and since I've been up here, that it's cheaper to do the in lieu than it is to build a parking lot, and that doesn't put us in a good place. Laura, I'm sensitive to what you said about maybe stepping into this. That's something I hadn't considered until you brought it up, and maybe that's a good way to go. The Gladiola lot has come up often, and I think it's maybe time that we start thinking about that and seeing what that would cost and what the timelines would be. That's a pretty prime lot that we could probably make better use of. Anthea, you said this, and it's true. We do have some relief on board with the Atlantic Crossing garage when that's done, and certainly with Sunday Village. So we are going to get some significant relief in the downtown area when those two structures are open. So I feel good about that. Directionally, I'm in favor of doing this, but I think there's a little bit of fine tuning that we have to do to kind of get it in a little bit better spot. But I think we're getting there, and I'm really glad that we've tackled this issue, and I want to see us get it over the finish line in the next few weeks or month or whatever the timeline might be. Thank you.
What do you need her to do to get there specifically?
I think we just need to, I think we need, and I'm happy to help. I think based on the commentary that I heard today, I think we should go back and fine tune this a little bit.
But Anthea is saying this doesn't really impact the.
I'm gonna make my remarks now.
Okay. Well, I was just wanting maybe for her to
No,
clarify
I
that.
understand. I understand. I'm gonna get to his remarks because they're important. We are going to have, whether we like it or not, an increasing dependence on public parking facilities, whether we like it or not. You know, every time I get on I-95, and I've had this conversation with both of you as to what the percentage of the garages are used. Every time I get on I-95, they're already saying, "Oh, well, you know, it's there's not enough capacity." So we're projecting out on today's numbers when we all know, as Commissioner, we all know at some point the Gladiola garage needs to be built. Now, whether we do it with revenue bonds, whether we do it, I understand there's a cost, but at some point we all know, because we have a finite area of Atlantic Avenue and downtown that we're trying to preserve, and we want to preserve the character of it, we want to preserve the scale of it, we want to preserve all this. So therefore, we're going to need parking. We're going to need to have to support it. So at some point, I think Gladiola is going to come. I actually find myself in agreement with the Historic Board on stating that the spacing, you know, of 750 feet, even though now you're going to 700 feet, you're going to 750, that the spacing actually, I don't think a 5-minute walk is an onerous walk. I mean, in most communities I go to, if I can find a parking spot within 5 minutes of where I'm going, I've got a home run. So we all love to say we want to have 2 minutes, but I mean, I think 5 minutes is probably an adequate number. I'm going to reserve for the moment my thought of whether or not the 35-year-old building deserves different treatment than others there. Okay, because it really depends on which 35-year-old building you're talking about. There are some that I have more affection to than others. But you're right. When you referenced West Atlantic, you talked about, well, you know, it's being pricey. I'm not sure I want to raise rates in West Atlantic. I'm of the view of keep incentivizing people to go to West Atlantic, and you know what we could do. And something that Commissioner Casal brought up several weeks ago. When we were talking about the parking garages, and we were talking about the parking rates that we have into downtown, you know, I would rather incentivize people to use our parking garage by charging rates in our parking lots so that we get the utilization in the garages that we're supposed to have, because we have these wonderful garages, but we're not charging for people to go because for whatever reason we haven't done it. We probably should do it. It'd be good for our revenues, be good for a lot of other things, and it will, I think, more accurately reflect what the status of parking is when people go downtown. Now, I happen to use the garages, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't. So I'm for whatever I can do to incentivize the use of the parking garages, because to charge X amount of dollars for an in-lieu spot when I know I've got 30 spots empty in a garage, and maybe when we finally do all these calculations and we get all the data, we're going to find maybe we don't have 50, maybe it's 25, maybe it's 150. So I just don't know. I think the project that you're undertaking to really determine what is the true parking use and availability at any given time on a Friday night or a Wednesday afternoon is like really important. I do think that what percentage of the buildings are at 65 feet? I mean, I would bet there's very few buildings that even qualify.
More than you would think.
More, really? Okay, well, that's good. Okay, that's good. No, I'm happy to hear that. I'm just throwing that out there as a question on my stuff. I do believe that we've been very effective using our parking requirements to keep structures smaller. As I said earlier, you know, in my thing, I mean, I like the scale, the scope, the feel of Atlantic Avenue, and the way you do that is you control your parking. We just don't want people going crazy there. That doesn't mean that I don't believe that the Gladiola lot shouldn't be developed, because I think we have a whole part of going to the beach and over that bridge that really could depend on that lot. Not so much, you know, next to the Federspiel or not to the next Old School Square, but that would add a huge feature. Obviously, I don't know the cost. I know it's going to be expensive. I think we can do it with revenue bonds. That's a discussion for another day. So and lastly, I do believe that the areas that you have put together truly have morphed. I mean, we don't have the distinction that we used to have between those areas. So I'm in total agreement with expanding that zone. And I'm in total agreement with Commissioner Casal and Commissioner Markin, I'm not sure you said it, that we do need to adjust our rates. Regardless of what we do here, these rates need to be adjusted because it is, when it becomes cheaper to just pay the fee. And I've had that same issue, by the way, with workforce housing and all that other kind of stuff. And I'd rather see the workforce housing than paying the fee, by the way. I'm on record for that too. So I do think we need to address that issue. Now, whether 50 is the right number, I don't know. I think 12.5 for West Atlantic is not the number. I mean, I want to keep them lower, just my view. But I do think we need to address. Huh? You put the pricing up, the new pricing? Yeah, because West Atlantic is going to be 12.5, and it's from 4,500. And I think that's it's not like they've been rushing there to begin with, and
I think
put
they
any disincentive there.
brought forth these prices for a reason. I think there's a justification behind it.
So
It's not
ultimately,
random.
I think I can try to take this and like simplify maybe what we're bringing forward. I think the question is, if it costs $31,000 right now to build a structured, what are we using as the base amount? And we were couching it as a base amount so that you were very conscious of what you were giving a discount to. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But it perhaps is a little complicated. I tend to do that. So I can try to take a stab at taking this input and simplifying the strategy. So I think there's a couple of points of direction that would be helpful. Like, it's very clear to me, like, West Atlantic is too expensive. And so maybe instead of doing a table that you get discounts for, we're just going to keep West Atlantic at $4,600 or something like that. And then questions like taking the beach out. Should the beach be out, or should the beach be okay for conversion? Things like I'm
I
pretty
like the
sure
beach
you.
out,
And
honestly.
I'm fine with the beach being out. I'm fine with not encumbered and making residential neighborhood more cumbersome with the parking. I
Correct.
think doing that buffer was a great idea.
Okay. And expanding to a 5-minute walk. I think honestly
Well,
that's
I mean,
where it
that's my
started.
view. I don't know what everybody. I mean,
it was a
you know,
previous commission that pushed it back.
If
so.
I can do a 5-minute
Yeah.
walk, then everybody at this, but you can do it.
High
a 25-minute
heels,
walk. And you can do a
summertime,
1,000.
it's a little challenging. I'm just saying.
Get
You don't want to
dropped in
get
it.
there soaked in sweat.
Okay.
He wants a more walkable downtown, so I think 1,000 feet works. So.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, I
Well, a
agree with
quarter
the-
mile isn't 1,000 feet. It's
sorry?
like a quarter mile. I think is 1,350.
Yeah. But so we can do a quarter, which is a typical planning 5-minute walk, or we can just do 1,000 and
Yeah, I'm
shave
just
a
saying
little
5
bit off
minutes.
for
We
heat.
should, I mean, it's
1,000
it's
sounds
silly to
fine.
say we want everything,
Okay.
within our 6-block area, which is what your 2-minute, walk is. And
Right.
It's
Okay. And then we'll look at the findings in terms of not just anything that's older, which I think is fair. And I know we've discussed some of that before. And then, all right, so if I can condense some of this and then try to bring it or speak to each of you to see what I've condensed it to, and then we'll bring it back. What do you think, Mr. Moore?
But it is a priority only because we're sitting here with a moratorium and people need to know, what they're going to be doing. So I hate to put that onus on you, but it's the reality is there's developers out there wanting to know what the rules are.
I just think for new construction, that's been the issue. If you're going to come in and you're going to build a really big building here, park it yourself, like Atlantic Crossing,
Right.
like Sunday Village, like those. So then do we want to make it available for redevelopment up to 2 stories, up to 3 only? There's
2.
ways we can do that. So
By the way, you keep talking about if you convert something to an office on Atlantic. We don't allow offices on Atlantic. Oh, upstairs. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, if I,
I know
may,
I tried. I couldn't get it. So.
if I may, so as to take us forward, there's been a great deal of dialogue and discussion relative to why we are where we are and the opportunities to move forward. I'd like to therefore authorize individual discussions, as Ms. Geniotis just suggested, over the next couple of weeks, enabling us to come back with formal considerations in one of the meetings in November. Your calendar for the month of November are Monday, November 4th, regular meeting, and Tuesday, November 19th, regular meeting. So given the opportunity to proceed as I've just outlined, we'll have that opportunity to get to that place, and I would welcome you all's support to that effect.
Consensus, everybody?
Yeah, Lynn, that gives us the right time frame. The November 4th meeting. Are you saying that would be a first read or another discussion?
It would be a first read.
Okay, great, thank you.
Great. But you will consult with us, to kind of get some kind of consensus through the city manager's office.
We can make it. Even if it is first read on the 15th of
The
November, we
19th,
could
actually.
finalize it by the end of the year, which was the goal.
That's fine.
Okay.
So November 4th or November 19th, possibly November
Yes.
19th. That's your
Yes.
next regular meeting in November.
As long as we finalize it before the end of the last extension period.
That would accomplish
That's
that
really
in
what-
either
what
meeting
I
in
would-
November.
Thank you, ladies.
Great.
Thank you.
I just real quick want to say thank you. You guys are really brought this forward, and I'm super thankful. I know how difficult this is, and I also want to thank the folks that got up and talked. When you're sitting up here, it's really good for us to hear that feedback, and I appreciate you very much coming out this afternoon and then making time at the podium. That's really meaningful to us that sit up here, so thank you guys for that.
Anything else? No comment?